Hello. Today's episode of the Conjecture Institute podcast is with Tom Hyde, who I will introduce in a moment. But just a note about this recording. We had issues. Firstly, Tom's audio is a little choppy in places, but if you're watching and listening to this, do persevere, because in the scheme of things over the hour and 20 minutes or so that we talked, it's only the odd word here and there that drops out. Secondly, we did lose Tom's video entirely around 23 or 24 minutes into this broadcast, but not the audio. And that makes no difference to the content of what Tom says. You can still hear him speaking, you just won't see him speaking. Without further ado, let's get started. Welcome back to the Conjecture Institute podcast and series of video interviews with its fellows. Today I've got with me Tom Hyde. Tom is a philosopher, geologist, a polymath who works on a number of different disparate areas of philosophy that he's going to talk about today, that he is calling Wonderism, how he's brought together Romanticism and movements within the Enlightenment into a coherent framework. We'll eventually get to that. But welcome, Tom. Where are you coming to us from today?
Thank you very much. Very generous introduction. That's a lot. I'm coming to you from England, sunny England. It is sunny today. Yeah, feeling pretty good.
You were in Australia for quite a while. We, in fact, met up, only about a year ago or something. You were leaving Australia because you were working here as a professional geologist. Australia, if anything, is one huge mine. Maybe we'll get to stuff about natural resources and climate and all that later on. But you have a really interesting backstory in terms of your, I suppose, intellectual life. You're straddling both of these domains of science and aesthetics, artistic and technological. You seem to have it all. Can you tell me how you made the transition from wherever you came, let's say at high school, and how you got into the fields that you did get into?
Yeah, I'm currently working as a geologist. Leans into more the STEMmy side. I do think geology is quite an interesting science in that regard, though, because it's so capacious. It has chemistry, geography, biology, physics. You can sort of go more STEMmy, less STEMmy. It can blend into like social science as well. So it's already quite a composite science. And also it selects for like nerds who like the outdoors, which is an interesting aspect. But no, yeah. So that was the reason why I chose it as well, because as you say, when I was at high school, I liked both STEM and uh, the humanities and the arts. And I think school, as a lot of people will know, makes you specialize as you go further on, and it often that means like cleaving one or the other. You have to choose science or art. I did end up going towards the science end, and I think the way that academia and industry is set up, that's probably the correct choice in terms of like career prospects and stuff like that. You can be a dilettante artist, writer, but you can't really be a dilettante scientist. Until today with Conjecture Institute, of course. But yeah, so I always loved both. I've never stopped loving, writing, poetry, painting. These are great passions of mine. And I think it ties to some of the ideas we're going to talk about, because I think a lot of the content of more artistic forms, like the deep meaning aspects of these things, existentialism, like where we live in the world, like humanism as well, like making people feel good about themselves, like we are, this glorious thing in the universe. I think those feelings of sublimity and like deep, meaningful aspects are best portrayed in artistic media. And you get a lot of that in science fiction, and that was a big draw for me when I first heard about David Deutsch as well, which we'll probably get onto. Hearing him on Sam Harris and the chapter 3, The Spark, that really captured me. So that's like the combination, at least early on.
So is that how you first encountered the work of David Deutsch, was through Sam Harris's podcast?
Yeah. So I think my first interest in philosophy was an angry 15-year-old atheist, as so many people are. The Gigabrain meme, etc. So big fan of Sam Harris, but he has a particular type of like brand of rationalism, and hearing David for the first time, I think really like blew my hair back somewhat. It did for Sam as well. I think Sam's an interesting character because he claims to revere David Deutsch's ideas, but still is somewhat pessimistic in ways.
I think one of my favourite quotes of Sam Harris, speaking perhaps to Eric Weinstein during one of their, well, back when they were friends, and he said something to the effect to Eric of, if I could have one person that could sort of hang around me all day, every day, it would be David Deutsch just on my shoulder there, whispering wisdom into my ears. And I thought that's a great endorsement from someone like Sam Harris to praise David Deutsch in that way. But yeah, it is the theme that links so many in our community together, is the optimistic way in which David Deutsch talks about humanity, which is a big theme that runs through your work as well. But with Wonderism, before we get to the meat of the matter, do you think that one of the motivations for it appears to be that critical rationalism, for example, the Enlightenment, for example, is lacking something? What is this thing that's lacking? Because I always talk about, the Enlightenment in these glowing sort of almost emotional feeling type terms rather than just the cold hard rationality of it. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm getting it wrong. But it seems to me that you're bringing an additional amount of what might be called curiosity, passion, something like that, layered upon rationalism. Can you explain more about, what do you think's lacking in the Enlightenment and traditional sort of rationalist views?
Yeah. So historical Enlightenment and modernist, more like analytic philosophy and like the Bay Area type rationalism. It's very, cerebral. It's logic. That's what it's for. Or it feels mechanical. And I think you are a good example of the blend. I would say it's quite wonderist, following Deutsch, to have these impassioned and you get it with science fiction a lot, where it's like the scale of the universe, the sublimity of it, and tying to optimism, how people sort of capture that and are agents of that as well. But it's true historically that um, rationalisms have been functional. They're materialistic. They don't hold that meaning aspect, and I do think there's a gap there, which has opened a lot of back doors for this God-shaped hole and argument, the meaning crisis. And I do think there isn't a supernatural need to fill that, because the natural is amazing enough already. So yeah, you're right. One of my goals with Wonderism is to make reason feel wonderful, which I think it naturally does. It creates wonder. One of the main conjectures.
Yeah, it's your pinned tweet at the moment is the talk that you gave about Wonderism, a nice, succinct sort of 20-ish minute overview. And what you're doing there is you are explicitly bringing together, as we already mentioned, the Enlightenment with Romanticism. Now, I'm not as familiar with Romanticism. Can you give me a little bit of an overview for myself and the audience, I suppose, about what it is and how it is to be distinguished from the Enlightenment?
Yep. So chronologically, Romanticism, there is a bit of overlap between the two. A lot of people think historically it goes Enlightenment and then boom, Romanticism. There is a bit of an overlap between, which a lot of scholars call uh, sentimentality. So if you look at like late Enlightenment thinkers, so you've got like Rousseau and even like David Hume and Adam Smith. So Adam Smith was a moral philosopher before he was an economist. He wrote his theory of the sentiments. They were thinking about feelings a lot. So I think one thing, a revision from that talk that you mentioned actually, is that the Enlightenment wasn't so opposed to feeling as it seems. They argued more for like tempered feeling via reason, which I would agree with. But yeah, no, Romanticism and it's generally thought more to be a literary movement. You think about these romantic poets, so like Wordsworth, Coleridge, these people who in like the late 18th and early 19th centuries were revolutionizing poetry with passion and appeals to nature. There are so many different aspects to Romanticism. It's really hard, like famously difficult to characterize. And then that's also different from philosophical Romanticism, which again has many different strands, but a lot of people consider to be a direct counter-enlightenment. So there are tenets of the Western tradition uh, and the Enlightenment following that of like, the world is explainable, understandable, it's coherent. There's the correspondence theory of truth attached to it. And then there are a few, I'm actually reading this book at the moment by Isaiah Berlin, it's three critics of the Enlightenment: Vico, Harman, and Herder. And these are, well, Vico's Italian, but the other two are like a strand of German Romanticism, which is explicitly anti-Enlightenment and they're like irrationalist. Like that's not an epithet; that's a sort of a term. They were anti-rationalism, which I think is false. Like being pro-reason, I think, and that's like a precursor for a lot of like post-modernist theories as well. So that is a direct counter-enlightenment, but that's not to be confused with the whole philosophy of Romanticism, which I think is very, as I say, very hard to characterize. Same with the Enlightenment, by the way, because both were probably some of the first philosophical movements, cultural movements that prized individualism. So it's sort of like a Cambrian explosion of individual competing ideas. So to clump these characters together, you think of the famous names from either movement. So the Enlightenment, you've got, Locke, Descartes. Already, you've got empiricism versus rationalism. There's two very different epistemologies within the Enlightenment. Hume, all these people, they have different ideas. Kant, very different again. So it's very difficult to say the Enlightenment is one thing, Romanticism is another thing. There are many Enlightenments and Romanticisms, almost as many people as there were living at the time. Yeah.
And you also mentioned in the talk something that I've laboured a couple of times as well, which is that even the Enlightenment, it is a misleading term in many senses because of the fact you had this movement on the continent, which was in some ways quite opposed to what was happening in, well, the Netherlands, in Great Britain. Could you speak a little bit more to what your perspective on that tension is in the Enlightenment itself?
Yes, different strands of the Enlightenment. Right, and Roy Porter, the historian, is probably the best exporter of this distinction. He distinguishes between the Anglosphere Enlightenment and the Continental one. And there are aspects of, so traditionally the Enlightenment is sort of like the French philosophers. It's Voltaire and Montesquieu and these characters. I think a great deal of the mistakes are due to like the rationalist idea, and this is like historical rationalism, the idea that reason is deductive logic applied to everything, which was an idea that empiricism fought quite well. And I think from that idea of like, I can sit in a chair, this is like what Descartes thought, I can sit in a chair and from certain axioms just reason the world into like being, into order, without any need to kick the world and it kick back in the empiricist sense. I think that led to a lot of utopianist ideas. This idea that we can generate a perfect world through reason alone, infallibly, which is a big difference. And in the case of France and the French Revolution, it was like revolutionary and violent, which readers of Popper will see a very clear connection between this idea of like utopianism in epistemology and tyranny in politics. Voltaire went to visit England, and he was like astounded at the not only the religious toleration. It wasn't there wasn't the Catholic unity, totality, but also class distinction. There were people, your shoe black and your tailor would be talking philosophy with you in the same way that gentlemen would be. So culturally, they were very different, but epistemological principles are probably the most important distinction.
Yeah, you mentioned Roy Porter there as the person who sort of really teased out this tension between the two forms of the Enlightenment. I think my favourite line in, I think it's his lecture that he gives that you refer to in your own talk, is describing Immanuel Kant as a timid state functionary. I think he calls him. It's like just dismisses him as this person who just argues for bureaucracy. And I thought, that seems quite reasonable. Although Popper, of course, had great respect for Immanuel Kant. He thought that he was sort of just dotting the I's or crossing the T's and correcting what was inherent in Kant. He thought that Kant almost got to Fallibilism somehow. So there we go.
Kant was facing the same problem as what Popper was. A lot of it reconcile rationalism and empiricism. I do think his idealism that he made from that was mistaken, but he was definitely tackling a real and important problem and important thing to say about it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Okay, so let's get a little bit more into Wonderism itself then. I think we've laid the groundwork here. Is there a way of coming at explaining or describing what Wonderism is in a paragraph, or perhaps even teasing out what problem are you solving, I suppose, which is certainly something you do deal with in your talk.
Yeah. Well, the problem is, again, I mentioned two supposed separate sides of cognition in my brain. There's like the hard cerebral side of thinking, logic. It feels mechanistic, and then there's the feeling you feel when you read a beautiful poem or something. They seem to be at odds with one another. How can you think one way and the other way at the same time? And to summarize, Wonderism is literally just in the word itself. I think this is I'm so happy with this etymological quirk of the word, that it's a homonym and it has two meanings. To wonder, you wonder why, it's the question mark, and you wonder, wow, it's the exclamation point. So it's two meanings. Astonishment. I think within those two words are these two different types of thinking. And once you notice this dichotomy, it just explodes. You can't. It's like which are inherent to both the Enlightenment on one side and Romanticism on the other. They sort of have the different sides of the scale. So Wonderism is an attempt in one word to combine the two. And I think the fact that we're going to come onto art as well, the fact that it's inherent to the word itself is like an aesthetic quality to it. It's like the form of the word has both meanings. And that is another tenet of Wonderism is like, I think to feel it, it's better in an art form. Maybe we disagree on this. I think you both have to say the thing, because in philosophy you want it to be explicit and clear and concise so that it's criticizable in the Popperian sense. But also, I think you should sing the thing in like the poetic sense so that you feel it, and that incites inspiration in a way that you read Popper, and Popper's probably he's the best philosopher I've ever read, but his writing can be a bit dry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. But this is not a criticism of Popper. This is basically a criticism of all other philosophers. The fact that his clear but dry style of prose or writing, as you explain, exists as like a manual. You describe it as this is like a set of instructions about how knowledge is generated or what knowledge is, this kind of thing. And so he has few peers, but this is simply because of the poverty of basically all other works of philosophy that are out there. Anyone who wants to try and slave their way through something like Wittgenstein or anyone from the 18th century will know what I'm talking about. It's far more opaque when Popper is set beside it. So in some sense, the dryness of Popper is a relief for people after having, if you try and explore other philosophers anyway. Now, in Wonderism, does it change at all the epistemology of Karl Popper, or does that remain unchanged under the rubric of Wonderism?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in a sense, Wonderism in the epistemology is sort of like a redressing of critical rationalism. Is inherently critical rationalist. And interesting that critical rationalism has one of these dichotomies, right? Popper's idea of conjectures and refutations, imagination and rationality, which ties back to the Romanticism Enlightenment distinction. Like I think Romanticism is imaginative. All these poets are just like overwhelming feeling, creating all these beautiful things, and then they criticize the Enlightenment for being too much of the criticism side. So critical rationalism is the solution to the problem. Is he already has both of these things inherent, so it is wonderist in that sense. But what critical rationalism doesn't do, and this is basically what we were just saying, is it doesn't have that imaginative, artistic, and I think there's something functional to art, or like more like formal expressionist writing, that is more powerful to the mind, like in a mimetic sense. It can transfer the ideas a lot better. For example, there's like in my talk, I compare Karl Popper with Ralph Waldo Emerson, who's more famous as a writer. Like his prose style is very florid and beautiful. He's my favorite writer. He does sometimes lose the thread a bit and goes into like, I can't understand what he's saying, but he says some exactly the same thing. But he doesn't say like universal, like any person can think anything. I can't remember if that's Popper or if that's Deutsch, but still.
I think it's
Um,
Deutsch.
okay, but even so, we'll compare the two. Um, Emerson says it in a short poem, and then he has like a short paragraph at the beginning of his essay History. I really recommend reading that short poem and reading the first paragraph only. And he sings universality, the beauty of it. It's like anything Plato has thought, I may think. Anything Shakespeare has written, I may read. Like all this stuff, and it goes on, it goes on. And you're like, wow, um, I feel universal. And universal in the sense of like I can do anything, but also I feel large, like the universe. It's inspiring, and I think that's one thing you don't get from the analytical traditional mode of philosophical writing.
Yes, yes, and moreover, I suppose the traditional rationalist take on this, which it's always struck me. I don't know how you feel about this, but that Popper essentially chose this term critical rationalism, but that there in Conjectures and Refutations, he actually vacillates for just a short moment where he says, basically, I could have called this critical empiricism. He could have come up with something else because it stands. It can stark contrast to rationalism. It also stands in stark contrast to empiricism as well. He was correcting errors in both of those. So it's misleading in a sense to think of Popper as just another kind of rationalist. It's not to say that those other rationalists weren't doing things that were inherently irrational, but it does have this kind of pessimism about it, the Descartes style of rationalist, because there can be an end point, there can be certainty gained. And so there's a sense in which the discovery, the wonder, can come to an end. But Popper rejects that whole idea. And then you're building on that, and you're actually refining what we mean by the wonder at that very fact about our circumstance, that nothing does come to an end. We make discoveries and we continue to get more interesting problems. Do you, I suppose this is something that's sort of the quote that I often go back to with Popper, but I think you're refining this, is that our whole problem situation, if you like, is to find a problem, fall in love with it, and until such time as you find a solution, at which point you recognise that you've got a whole family of daughter problems that will follow from finding any solution. So you're also building upon that kind of theme.
Yeah, no, it's certainly infinity. And I think there is a very interesting connection between fallibilism and optimism. This idea that the fact that we're always wrong, if you tell someone we're always wrong, that's like, oh, well, what's the point then? It's like their first intuition is nihilism. But actually, it means, well, if we can be wrong, then we can be right. And if we're always wrong, we can always be more right, right? So this is how the beginning of infinity is there. There's infinite resource of discovery in the universe, which is a very optimistic thing. Contrasted with, historical rationalism, as you say, the Cartesian way of thinking of like, well, I've succeeded in doing rationality. I have performed logic. I am correct. Here we are. This is the end of the line. I can't do anything, right? Um, so you would fall in love with a problem, solve it, and then your wife's dead. Whereas in this case, you have more and more and more and more. So yes, it's definitely inherently more optimistic. And the idea that we have, and we get better problems, right? So if we can progress, the solution to a problem creates a better problem, and that's a better solution after that. So in the wondrous sense, we have, and you can see this, right? We have aeroplanes. If you showed someone born in 1500 a Boeing 747 in the sky, it'd be the most awe-inspiring thing. Like it would probably break their brain. They wouldn't understand what they're looking at. And then in the future, we're going to have even greater, like mega constructions and qualitatively different things that we can't, that can't predict ahead of time, can't prophesy that. So the wonder is unbounded. There's more good, more awe, more sublimity in the future than there would be otherwise.
Now, I can hear some objections already, because it's the kind of objection that I've had myself, that, okay, you might very well call this progress, this existence of this 747, the possibility of being wrong, okay, that objective truth about reality, that all works fine when it's in science and tech. Well, take me to art then. How can you say that there is an objective sense to beauty, that we can have progress when it comes to aesthetics? What does Wonderism have to say about that? What does Tom Hyde have to say about that? That really, go to any modern art gallery and different people are going to have different tastes about what beauty entails.
Yeah, so I do follow Ayn Rand quite closely on this. I have some important disagreements with her, but I agree with her idea of art compared with science has stagnated. It hasn't progressed as much, and this is just simply just due to false ideas about what art is or should be. I think without getting too essentialist, like what is art? I think a lot of people struggle with this question. For me, art is like the formal definition of art, as opposed to language, which has like definite symbols that mean definite things. It doesn't matter how they look; they're just representations of something. Whereas like art is a collection of symbols that are physical, that they exist in the world, they're representational, and you sort of have to conjecture their meanings with your creativity. It's more oblique like that. And then within that formal definition, there's like the content of the art, right? So should art be deep, meaningful? Should it be sorrowful? Should it be all these things? And like art today and in the past. So if you think about what beauty is, these ideas that you would attach to beauty of like the depth of the meaning. There's like delicacy, prettiness. It's to do with like relationships between the elements, how like they have like grace and these things. Then you've also got sublimity, which is another idea within the content of art, which is like large, powerful, over like bearing. It's like this awe-inspiring thing. So basically, it's just like art has changed its view on what it wants to do. Like, do we want to be beautiful? Do we want to be sublime? Do we want to depict man and life as beautiful and sublime? A lot of the criticisms, especially from Ayn Rand, is like she says no, they've stopped doing that. I actually read a very interesting book recently. It's called The Painted Word by Tom Wolfe. It's about modern art, and this is like 1900 up to about 1970. And I didn't understand modern art at all until I read this. So he actually has like, there were theories. They thought they were doing a certain thing, right? There were these theorists, I think it's Rosenberg, Greenberg, and their whole thing was just flatness was the ideal. So you look at a lot of modern art, they're raging against 3D representation in art. So you look into a painting, and it looks like a room, and you feel like you can step into it. And they thought that was a betrayal of the picture plane. It should be 2D. So they're basically like delineating painting from sculpture and 3D representation. But then in that, they sort of lost any representation of meaning. So there wasn't any, they didn't really value beauty. They didn't value sublimity. They didn't value like content. It wasn't representational. It just had to be flat. That was the whole thing. So I think that's an example of a theoretical idea of what art should be, leading people into blind alleys and making, as we say, modern art probably not as beautiful as historical art.
So can you explain to me what is aesthetics sort of fundamentally, and is the objective, as you see it from whether your own view or someone like Rand, is the point to try and turn art into something that's purely about aesthetics?
Yeah, so I delineate between, you talk about art, I would say art is created beauty, like by an agent. So I say like a landscape, born from geomorphological aspects isn't art, because it's just a happenstance of the mechanical universe. So art is a created piece of work that has beauty. Aesthetics is the study of art, is how I would say that. And then beauty is this idea of like, there's all these abstract ideas of elegance and proportion and stuff like that. So those three things are slightly different. They're all connected. I think that art should be beautiful. But then again, you get into these difficult questions of like, comedy. and you have I have a whole theory of dramatic art, which has irony, fiction, and conflict. Like you watch a horror film, and that depicts like horrific things happening in the world, but it's fictional, didn't happen. No, John Doe in the film Seven didn't actually kill anyone. The screenwriter of that film didn't hurt a single person in the making of that film, and made a good night out at the cinema. I think it's actually quite an ethical miracle that we can create these fictional stories that, whereby no one's hurt, you see some horrific things, some of the worst things you ever would, and nothing's happened. Um, so in that sense, I do disagree with Rand, because Rand says that all art should be in this like normative sense of like, this is how the world should be. It should be reflective of our aspirations, our moral aspirations. We should depict man as exclusively heroic, as opposed to like she contrasts it with medieval art, where we're seen as like, you know, these tiny little hulking creatures. So yeah, I do disagree on that front. Still developing this at the moment, but I do like normative art. I do want art to make, and this ties into Wonderism. Does Wonderism have a moral, like, what am I trying to put forward? And I do want people to feel good about themselves. Like, we are the beginners of infinity. We are large. We are, you know, good. We are capable of being better. So I would say yes, I want normative art, but I think it's a mistake to limit it to that.
And great art is, of course, something that we're attracted to. We return to it. Galleries exist because people are drawn to these things. The word attraction is also something that's used in physics, but it's also used in romance. And you have a philosophy of romance as well. Is there a link there between the kind of attraction one feels to art and beauty and the kind of attraction that one feels in a romantic relationship, let's say?
Yes, definitely. I have my theory of art, my theory of romance, that it is literally an art form. In exactly the same way that painting, poetry, all these other things are, romance is that. And I think it's the highest possible art form because it's interactive and it's creative, right? So you go to an art gallery and you're looking at a painting. The creativity is happening in your mind. You're looking at the picture. It's unilateral. The picture doesn't do anything. It exists and it has elements, but you're the one generating the aesthetic theories. Whereas like you're on a date with a beautiful woman or a beautiful man, and you find them beautiful. There's obviously the physical aspects. You know, they have form. They look a certain way. That's important. They dress a certain way. That's important. They smell. There's all these like, you know, physical aspects, but then there's also, you know, their humor, their ideas, um, uh, deeper like cognitive. So it's like you're aesthetically attracted to them as a person, as an agent, and they can do it back to you. So the arrows are bilateral in that sense. So it's like going to an art gallery, and the art gallery appreciates you back. I think it's the highest ideal of aesthetic appreciation, because I find you beautiful and you find me beautiful in return. And then the elements, say for example, in a painting, the elements you're considering are like, you know, a brushstroke here, or the idea of like, you know, spaciousness or proportion. That's the elements of that discrete piece of art. Whereas with a person, the elements are a universal explainer, which contains in it everything. So you can fall in love with, say, your wife's a physicist, and she has a beautiful idea about cosmology, and you're like, now I love the universe because like it's like the aesthetics of your mind. I can't imagine anything greater than that. So I'm going to try and develop that further, make it more formalized. But yeah, romance is the highest ideal of art, in my opinion.
And also, we might very well say that romance is something that very much gives meaning to a person's life, that once a person is involved in a romantic relationship, the intensity of the relationship can really bring crashing down upon a person the meaning of life in some sense, that this is what things are about. Now, I think one of your areas of interest is the meaning crisis and how Wonderism might actually be part of the solution to the meaning crisis. Could you explain what this meaning crisis is, firstly, and then how Wonderism might come to address it?
Yeah, well, I think it ties to this, what we were saying earlier about how, you know, rationalism and the Enlightenment sort of outward uh, progress, like material improvement world. You go on, I forget the name of it's like humanprogress.org or whatever it is, and you can look at all the graphs of like child mortality. You want that to go up or down. You want fewer children to die. Anyway, the graph's going in the right. And that, you see that, I'm like, okay, this is like a Excel brand of optimism. Cool, that's good. Like, and people can know that, but like cerebrally, but they don't feel it, right? And I think I talk about it in the talk as well. The history of wonder has largely been leveraged by religious dogma. And the instantiation of that in like beautiful architecture. You walk into a church and you feel at one with God. The acoustics of that room, the dust, the miasma, the rays of light through the rose window, all this stuff, and that makes you feel at one with the universe. Or you take perhaps mind-altering drugs, and that does a similar effect. But I think that's all unnecessary. I think the actual creation of material improvement is a wonderful thing. Like, a lot of people criticize modernist architecture, but I think a modern skyscraper, even like an older one, maybe like an Art Deco, like the Empire State Building, is as incredible as uh, St Paul's Cathedral, and the fact that we can build that, we did that. And the only reason why we could do that is through advancements in material science, industry, economics, all these things. So really, it's like flipping it back on itself, saying the creation itself is the thing to be like attached to meaningfully. The fact that we have done that, it's like my attempt to make humanism feel. I don't want to. I'm not trying to make it a religion, but whatever's good from a religion, I'm turning it back towards people, and I think that's very important.
Doesn't death make life all the more wonderful? Isn't the fact that you know that there's only a short amount of time left, isn't that a thing that causes you to be more interested in the present moment? That if you were to live much longer, you might not value life as much?
No, um, I reject this idea of like a thing ending makes your time. Like, there is a logic to that. The fact like I might die tomorrow, therefore I have to make the most of now. Like, oh, rush, rush, rush. There's a good book called Einstein's Dreams, where the author, I forget his name, he explores the idea of like, what if time and space was different? And there's one chapter where there's infinite time, and in this world there's two classes of people. There's the do everything people and the do nothing people. Because I feel like you can do, from that logic, you can have both of these psychological reactions where it's like, oh, I've got infinite time, don't worry about it, I'll chill out. Or I've got infinite time, I can do infinitely many things, this is amazing. And I think that that second position is the better one to have. And conversely, I think if I'm going to die tomorrow, I might be spurred into doing more things, but I might be crippled by anxiety and fear, like, oh my god, and then do nothing. So I reject this intuition that people seem to have. And secondly, I reject the idea that dying. There's a finite amount of wonder you can have in a life, in a finite life, and then you die, and then you can't have any more wonder. But if my life is unbounded, then I can have an unbounded amount of wonder in that life and create, as we say, the problems get better. So the quality of the wonder is going to get better. There's going to be more curiosity and more astonishment, but it's also going to be a higher grade of curiosity and astonishment the longer we live, a 500-year life, a 5,000-year life. The curve is accelerating.
It seems to me that what you're talking about right now, this idea that an ever longer life becomes ever more wondrous and just asymptotically gets better if we could extend our lives ever further. The idea that some people have that it's quite opposite to that the shorter the life, beyond a particular limit, the more valuable it is kind of isomorphic with the problems right now that people are talking about with respect to AI, that if the AI agents come along and the robots come along, they will be able to do all of the things that people will do, and so there'll be nothing left for people to do but to sit back and drink cocktails. What's your response to this? Because we were talking about Sam Harris before in one of his, I think perhaps his most recent TED talk he gave about AI risk. He literally talks about this kind of vision of the future of humanity, that we will indeed be relieved of all problems, and so therefore there will be nothing left to do. In the same way that they're, living long enough, you will have nothing left to do. You will have done all the things. So is the argument basically the same against those two horrific visions of reality?
Yeah, I mean, it's the spatial, it's the obverse side. It's a spatial component of that argument to the temporal one that we just had. So saying like, I'm going to live forever, therefore there's no problems. It's saying if there's more people at the same time, then there'll be no problems. But as we say, like, we're all, equal in our infinite ignorance, and that's the infinite is very important. You can't fill infinity. We could have a population of, and I'm a massive like pronatalist. I think we should have more and more people. I think this is true, given universality, that if they're AI people, if they're made of silicon, they're made of a million crabs, which is my favorite example. That they patients using crab, crazy. It doesn't matter. Like the cognition is fundamentally the same. So yeah, if there's more people at one time, and I think this is true, you can see it. Like imagine in 1500, where there was something about like 400 million people in the world, there were fewer cool things being thought of. And if we agree that like thinking cool things, creating solutions from problems creates more problems, and that happens ad infinitum, then the more people there are in the world, the more cool things there are to think about. The fact that there's people thinking about things that I've never heard of, I mathematics, taekwondo, whatever, is good for me. And I have no idea if I live for a long time, then maybe I'll become interested in that and read it 100 years later. So the more people there are, it enriches my life. It doesn't detract from it. It's positive sum. It's not negative sum.
But it still is the prevailing view that there will come an end point to either enumerating the tasks that would ever be necessary to maintain civilization, or we simply reach fundamental scientific bedrock. Or the other version of this is not only do we solve all the problems that can be solved, but we will be incapable, we as human beings will be cognitively closed to making progress beyond a particular point, because the solution to whatever problem we have will just be beyond us. We won't have big enough brains, so to speak. So what do you think about this? This is something that Neil deGrasse Tyson, for example, talks about with respect to physics. He says we may have to leave it to the aliens because we might not understand what comes after, general relativity or whatever your favourite present best physics theory is.
Yeah. Yeah, well, this is just a rehashing of Dawkins' middle world theory, which I've heard you speak about, and David Deutsch, because it's just it goes against universality. This idea that if we are universal Turing machines and running on that is a universal explainer algorithm, then anything that can be thought by us. I think that's true. I've yet to see anyone actually take that super seriously. Like, okay, so I understand the concept of universality, therefore, but it's wrong in some way. I've never, Bostrom, Tegmark, all these people, Yokowski, I don't think anyone's done that. So there's no like supra physics beyond our conception. Yeah,
it's only ever deployed in response to quantum theory, by the way. It's like they just hold this one thing up as, that's the thing we don't understand, or the fact that there is disagreement in the community of physicists, that therefore this is evidence of somehow we were incapable of understanding it. But yeah, I agree with you. There's nothing particularly.
we could probably trace it back to the Counter-Enlightenment strand of Romanticism. It's going all the way back to there, which is in physics. The point where they're like, oh well, the world isn't understandable. There's no correspondence theory of truth. There's all this stuff. So
there you go. Yeah,
bringing it back.
So, and I think ultimately, I suppose that may be a secularized version of the religious notion that, well, God is the thing that we don't understand, but, having gotten rid of God, the atheists then just replace it with, here's this other thing I'm going to hold up, maybe God doesn't exist, we're too clever for that, but here's this thing that ultimately the human mind cannot possibly understand. One of the problems that animates people right now that causes them wonder, or the opposite too, is climate change. And you're uniquely placed, I think, here to remark on this, because you've worked in the resources sector and you have an understanding of the geology, the deep history of time, and the possibility for improvement coming from that version of optimism that David Deutsch speaks about in The Beginning of Infinity. So could you tell me a little bit about what your perspective is on climate change?
Yes. So actually, I did a master's degree in geophysical hazards. So it's like earthquakes, volcanoes, hurricanes, natural disasters, that sort of thing. And I think the biggest takeaway from that course, they taught us this conceptual risk equation, which is risk equals, and there's these like the positive aspects, so the things that increase risk. So it increases the hazard itself. So for example, that would be like the volcano, the tsunami, the greenhouse gas in the case uh, of climate change. So that increases, the risk increases. That makes sense. It increases with exposure, which is the idea of like the more things we have that can be destroyed, the more risk there is. Like, if we have a city in the desert, so like Las Vegas, compared with the desert itself, there's more exposure there's more value in Las Vegas than there is in the desert. There might be some environmentalists who disagree with that, but I disagree with them. And then it also scales positively with vulnerability, which is like our proclivity to be harmed by a given hazard. Like, I have more vulnerability to a meteor strike than I do to rainwater. And then you divide that by resilience, which is a measure of like how quickly you can return back to initial conditions or better. So it scales positively with the first three and negatively with the last one. And I think basically all of climate discourse is stymied by this obsession with hazard. Which is true. Like the whole historical debate about climate change, is it real, is it not, was all about the like atmospheric physics. It's all about the actual mechanical, like physical science side of it. And I think nowadays it's not anymore. Like most people, you might still have some cranks who think it's false, but most people are agreed that anthropogenic climate change is real. The emission of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere does have a warming effect, and that does have hazard associated with it. But I think what they forget is that there are these other, they lean into more like economics and social science side. So we create more wealth, which increases our exposure, which does increase risk. But what wealth also does is it decreases our vulnerability and increases our resilience to hazards. So fossil fuels, for example, 80% of our energy is from fossil fuels, and their emission does increase the hazard via greenhouse gas emission, but it also decreases. We build seawalls, for example, or just for example, like we build better houses that they can survive earthquakes, but they also just heat our homes better. I think there's like 1 billion people. This is from Alex Epstein. He makes this argument like 1 billion people still live using the electricity of like an American refrigerator. And I think the argument, it's hard to argue that these people wouldn't be better off with more energy, because poverty is the greatest vulnerability. This idea that we were naturally safe from the earth, and this is a point David Deutsch makes again, before civilization, is just patently false. And you look at the biological history of the world as well. 99.9% of all species have been tortured and starved and diseased to death. I think the romanticization of nature, coming back to Wordsworth and these other characters, is a mistake. There is beauty in nature, but only from a distance. You look at a tiger at a zoo, and you think the tiger is beautiful, but it's a glass pane between you that makes him beautiful. Otherwise, he's not very beautiful when he's chomping down on your throat. And I think that's writ large for all of civilization, people living in a natural world which tries its hardest to kill us by any means.
Yeah, from a distance is right. Like even the great landscapes that you mentioned before. Pick any of the, Iguazu, Niagara, Victoria Falls, any of these great waterfalls around the world, only from a distance. Get up to it, not very beautiful once you're inside it. And the same is true of deep space, of course, as well. Beautiful out here, look at the stars in the sky, but you don't want to go too far up into the atmosphere before you're going to find things not particularly favourable to making an open-ended stream of knowledge creation.
Space is beautiful in a spacesuit, and I think, sorry, just to interrupt, and the metaphor is that fossil fuels and the wealth it's created is the civilizational space that has saved us.
Yes, and in Australia at the moment, we've just elected the side of politics. Well, in fact, both sides of politics are for net zero, this thing that it seems many governments around the world are animated by, trying to get to net zero. But in Australia, we've chosen, I think, uniquely, to not have nuclear as part of the mix as well. What strikes me about any of this is that the government is somehow or other the entity that we are charging with deciding what the energy mix should be. I don't understand why it's not a market. Now, you have some views on anarchism as well. Could you tell me a little bit about that and how that might make contact with these issues around energy and, let's say, climate as well?
Well, yeah, totally. It's interesting. The bigger the industry, the more grabby the government seems to want to be, which I think is like inversely, it should be the other way around. The more important it is, the more we put to the market, in my opinion. Now, I mean, that just comes to the age-old question, like, are governments efficient at allocating resources, etc., etc., etc.? I think not. The way I look at this, and I get in some trouble with Popperians, is I do think, because they argue that anarchism is sort of utopian, it has utopian streaks and revolutionary streaks and stuff like this, and like violates institutions and traditions. But that aside, I think in terms of like epistemology and the rejection of authority, anarchism is the end goal. It's like there's a logic to saying we want to live in a world where there's no authority, no epistemological authority over like, you have to do this, you can't use nuclear power. Well, let's have a rational discussion about it instead. Don't threaten me with violence to do it on a civilizational scale. Don't threaten to throw me into a cage. Let's have a rational discussion, and we can, the economic version of that is let's leave it to the market, which is like the economic rational engine, in my opinion. So I think anarchism, this idea of like no person is authoritative over another person, is the culmination social, and then all of like the traditions, everything that Popperians want to conserve, can be inherent in disseminated cultures. It doesn't have to be an authority structure to preserve tradition, in my opinion. So I think the Popperian criticism is mistaken.
I often think that I've mentioned this before because I've seen Euron Brooke, the great promoter of objectivism, out there debating anarchists at times, and I think it was Douglas Murray talking to Sam Harris one time, that it seemed to me like what Douglas said to Sam was, here in the West we're going to be debating whether or not this particular trans person really is a woman or not, while the Islamists are at the door with Kalashnikovs trying to bash it down to get into the debate. The same sort of thing I had that in mind when Euron Brooke debates one of these anarchists. It's like the real war at the moment isn't between minarchists, small government types, anarchists and capitalists. It's the Marxists are outside the door right now. We should be all united in the battle against genuine authoritarianism, which seems to be washing across. Although this could just be my perspective as someone who didn't live through previous eruptions of authoritarianism, but it does seem to me to be a unique time that may be on the wane in a place like the US. But who knows after the next election if there is another turn to authoritarianism, or if in fact what's going on in the US is just a different kind of authoritarianism that's happening at the moment. I don't know what you think about any of that.
Yeah, there's definitely a multivariate analysis with cultural aspects. Like you vote for one politician, and he's going to have maybe 2 ideas on one axis that you agree with, and then 15 on 15 other axes that you disagree with. So Trump is still, to name, it doesn't need to be an anti-Trump thing, but like he's isolationist, and the tariffs is a terrible economic policy, and maybe he's better. He's like outlawed DEI, which I think is a good thing. The racialism of the woke lefts, I think I'm critical of that. I think that is good that he's doing that, but I think on balance he's I wouldn't have voted for him. Yeah, but yeah, it's a difficult analysis for sure. I do think it's interesting. You were talking about enemies of civilization being more important to combat than these other interesting problems. I think that's just another criticism of like the fact that enemies of civilization exist and coercion exists, and it makes interesting discussions between minarchists and anarchists. We're like, well, we shouldn't have this interesting discussion because there's someone at the door who's trying to kill me with an axe, which is like it's curtailing our rational capacity. Like the jihadists trying to destroy our mechanisms of error correction and stuff. They're largely succeeding, which is unfortunate.
Now, let's go to some of the questions that the people on Twitter have asked. We'll begin with Edwin. Edwin has asked, well, he said, I'd love to hear if and where Tom thinks existentialism and humanism tie into Wonderism. Those philosophies seem to embody the Deutschian optimism of problems are inevitable, problems are soluble. And then he links to something else. But firstly, existentialism and humanism, what do they have to do with Wonderism?
Yeah, well, I think they're slightly different. I would say Wonderism that's one of the inherent facets of my the package of ideas within Wonderism that I want to push forward is this humanist idea of like we are the wonder, we are the sublimity, we are the large and the great and the good. So it is inherently humanist. I think one thing that Romanticism does really well actually is this idea of hero worship, which a lot of people criticize because it gave rise to like Napoleon and then the totalitarian people and like Hitler and all these people. But what's good about hero worship is it's like people are amazing, and I think if you tie that with both fallibilism on the one side, so we can be wrong, no one's infallible, heroes are fallible as well, and you also tie it with universality, this idea like any person can be heroic in this like grand sense, like, and in the sense like heroes can be Shakespeare, like Thomas Carlyle, a romantic writer, he lists his ideas of his examples of heroes, and Shakespeare's in there. He has like Dante and Emerson also lists like Goethe, and you could have like Einstein and Newton and all these people. Like, but given universality, anyone can achieve that level of thinking. So I think that's really good. This idea of like making people seem large because they are large, they are universally large. And then existentialism, I'm not super well read on, but as I understand it, it's like an offshoot of romantic thinking. It's like a late romantic thinking with like Kierkegaard and these people. I like its focus on meaning, on inward, like introspection, like which again is like a difference between the romantic and Enlightenment traditions. It's less materialist. It's more like, who am I? What's my identity? What's my place in the world? What's my meaning? These are important ethical questions that I think we should ask. So they're both somewhat connected to Wonderism because the idea of who we are is inherent to me saying we are large and we are good. So it's slightly captured for sure.
It's amazing how deep that simple truth runs about. You keep on invoking universality, and I love it. This whole idea that we are as large as you can possibly imagine. We can encapsulate it all. Inside of our minds is reflected a model of the rest of the cosmos. So that's it. That simple truth. It undoes so many misconceptions when it comes to the AI debate, to the distinction between humans and all other non-human animals, and the significance of human life and the moral centrality of it. It all arises out of an understanding of universality and the uniqueness of what a person happens to be, and what systems are not people, and therefore do not deserve the same moral status or standing as what a person does.
Yeah.
This is just off the top of my head. Now, what do you think about, speaking of romance, speaking of universality, and speaking of the meaning crisis, the usage of these AI, people are dating AI basically, using chatbots and getting involved in relationships with AI. Have you got any thoughts about that? Because people seem to be going down a certain kind of rabbit hole. Are there benefits to this? Are there negatives for this? Thoughts about this in general?
Yeah, I'm largely negative. Like, if I talk about the beauty of true romance, like person to person romance, as like the highest ideal of art, because the other person is a creative agent. If the other person isn't a creative agent and they're just token predictors or large language models, like it's not real. It's the same structure of this idea. Like, someone asked, I think David Deutsch, if you were to live in the Matrix and it was like full of all these like generated people, and he'd be like, well, I get bored pretty quick because I'd realize they aren't people. They're not internal worlds solving their own problems creatively with their own thoughts and feelings. They're just rote machines, pretty much just running. So I think these people who are probably not very happy, it might be like lean towards like an incel culture, subculture of like, I can't find a girlfriend, therefore I'm going to talk to an LLM. I think it's somewhat tragic, and I think it's but a bit of a simulacrum and a mockery of real romance, which is, as I say, probably the highest ideal of art.
Yeah. Incel culture is possibly the thing that stands in stark contrast to Wonderism. These are people who, unfortunately, lack wonder in their life. You won't be an incel if you become genuinely captured by a problem. Much less, of course, if you become genuinely interested in another person. It seems to be the perfect antidote to being an incel.
The draw of creative romance is like, it's both sides of the wonder, right? So it's like curiosity. It's like, I want to learn about your ideas. I want to learn about how you think. And it's also like the astonishment of like, wow, you are so knowledgeable. You look at the world so beautifully. You're so funny. All these things. Whereas you can't get that with an LLM romance.
Velmerin has asked, how do you personally feel affected by Deutsch's theory of error corrective, and how do you apply it in practical daily life?
How do I feel? I guess that's more Popper's idea, advanced by Deutsch. Sure. It ties back to this fallibilism realization that fallibilism ties to optimism. The only reason why Wonderism can happen is because we can be wrong, and similarly, the reason why we can be wrong means that we can be right, which means we can correct errors. So I feel very good about that. That realization of that truth is wonderizing. That's not a word. I just made that up. So I feel pretty good. Yeah, it makes. I like the knowledge that the world is unbounded and I can be better tomorrow than I am today. It makes me feel pretty wonderful.
Corey has asked, the counterfactual of infinite learning through an engine of wonder, it becomes its own regress, words to that effect. I can wonder about irrelevant problems ad infinitum, problematization. Does a cloak of rationality make it more relevant? Are they co-equals, or is one merely an affordance?
Okay, so I'm grasping what I think that means. I think the error there is inherent to I can't remember what the exact wordage was. Like bad problems, basically. Which I think.
I think so, yeah, getting hung up on something. Yeah.
Right. So I can ruminate, wondering about the same thing over and over. You have a hang up there, sort of like a loop. That's not functional rationality at that point. You're not doing conjectures and refutations. You're just it's a failure of wonderism. That's not you don't have the curiosity and then the astonishment at the end, which is like the structure of what I'm talking about. That's just a mistaken curiosity about a non-thing. But generally, I think like these problems are like such a subset. I think if you have a real, genuine problem in your life, then it's by definition important to you because if it's in your problem situation and it's attached to your existing knowledge and you're like impelled, we sort of have this like natural tendency to like well, if I move to Spain and I don't speak Spanish, but I want to buy some groceries, like that's a problem that I have. And now I need to learn Spanish I need to learn the numbers and I need to learn these things. Like that's a problem that I need to do. But if you're in this depressive loop, I not only think that's maybe slightly different, that's not real cognition, but even if it is, that's a subset, like a very small subset of the problems that everyday people think. So I don't think it's as, ironically, that's not as a big problem as I think the questioner is making out.
Fakery has asked you to speak about aesthetics, which you've done, but then has listed a number of sub-questions within this. So I'll go through them one at a time. Firstly, I think I almost orbited this one with my questions. Is beauty an answer to aesthetic problems?
Is beauty an answer to problems? So this is, again, it's like people will disagree, like what is the purpose of art? What is the purpose? Should it contain, and it depends how you define beauty as well. Like, is beauty the formal aspect? Is it the relationship of these elements? Or is it the content, the meaning of the actual work? So is it these ideas of, elegance and flowing and prettiness, and like all these abstract concepts? That's how I think of it. I think it's the content of the thing. So if a thing is beautiful, it has those things. Do all artworks need that? I think I've answered that. Like horror films don't necessarily have it. You look at the work of like Bosch or Geiger or something like that. They're not as beautiful as like a Monet or whoever else. So there are loads of theorists who think beauty is like the sole height and end of art. I think they may be thinking about it differently to me. But yeah, no, let's move on. Not sure.
Is all good art hard to vary?
Well, that's interesting. I think potentially yes. I think there will be details to every piece of art whereby you change them and it's no longer successful. There are like functional elements to any painting, but then there will be like ancillary elements, details to that painting, like a leaf is a millimeter to the left. That's not going to destroy the art immediately. I think the spirit of the question is like, is all great art sort of measured by every detail in that work being functional to the success of that work? My intuition says no. I think there are some works that have single prominent causes that make them good, and then sort of like background elements that can change here and there, and it still be successful. But then I'm thinking, the phrase, the line from the film Amadeus, where he's like, Salieri's talking about Mozart's work, and he's like, disrupt one note, and there would be diminishment, one phrase, and the entire structure would fall. So that sort of leans to the idea, like, yes, great art should be hard to vary in that way. But again, I think it's hard to say, because any piece, any painting, for example, has millions of emergent co-relating elements and like the relationships. So I feel like any work will always have some variation that you can make to it. It might get better as well if we're like artistic optimists. Moving the leaf a millimeter to the right might make the artwork better as well.
Where have you seen recent aesthetic progress?
I think this is happening. I think people are too pessimistic. So I say I follow Ayn Rand, and I do agree that compared to sciences, there's probably been less. But counter examples, like just any film that's ever released, that film never existed before. Like you watch the new Mission Impossible, which is in the cinemas now, and there's some like stunts in that have beyond. If you showed that to Buster Keaton, who was like the greatest stuntman of his time, that's aesthetic progress. The fact that they can have cameras that can follow actors and do those things, the scale of those stunts, the way the director is really good as well. The way that the technological progress of the cameras can follow them in a certain way that couldn't happen before. Inventing new like cinematic languages. Drones are doing this today as well. You can do things with a camera today that you could never do back then. They were basically static. So yeah, I think every new artwork is inherently, well, there are some failures of art, but every successful new artwork is aesthetic progress.
And the final question from Fakery here. I think there's a misconception perhaps within the question, but we'll see how you go. It says, is direct experience a worse way to appreciate beauty than using layers of technology and theory?
Yeah, well, the mistake you're is direct experience. At least what you're talking about. I think it's a mistake to this idea of like we can just passively receive artworks. Popper would disagree with this. Everything is theory laden, and that's as true for art as it is for any other knowledge. So if you're, aesthetically appreciating a thing, it might feel passive, like you watching a film, you just understand it. Well, it's because you've automated, you understand English, you've lived your whole life seeing 3D representations of the real world, so it feels automated. But you're doing this active generative conjecture refutation process in your mind. It is critical rationalist, and you're applying theories to these things as you would anything else. So no, you're always theorizing. Everything is every person who looks at an artwork is an art critic and a philosopher. So
yeah, and I suppose if we were to steelman Fakery's question there, this idea of direct experience, I suppose what he's got in mind is there like a qualitative difference between appreciating the Mona Lisa at the Louvre, you're just staring at the thing, there's unmediated by technology and theory in some sense, as versus some kind of artwork which has been generated perhaps by using a computer, let's say. But actually on that, do you think that AI generated art constitutes art?
short answer, yes. I think it conveys meaning in form, so that's my way I delineate it. I think what people mistake here is like they view art as its own quality. They're saying like the only thing that is like worthy of this term art is great art. It's only the Shakespeares and the Mona Lisas and these things. Whereas there's plenty of bad human-made art. The fact that it's bad art doesn't mean it's not art. It's just bad art. It's like there's bad writing, there's bad science. It doesn't mean it's not science or writing. So I think when judging AI art, I would guess my conjecture would be that generally AI art is less good than creative agent art, because in the same way, like we spoke about, if I was having a conversation with an AI partner, they wouldn't be creative, so there'd be like a lower quality to that conversation. And any quality that they do have has been mined from creative people anyway. So the art that is generated, it is new, like these representations, the combination don't exist prior, but the style, the textures, maybe like the compositions they're mined in the same way that the words ChatGPT uses are mined and generated that way. So there is some great AI art out there, and I think you need to judge after it's been created. We're judging by content, not by source. But generally, and if we're optimists in the future, the best art that will be created by people.
Excellent. The great David Hearn has asked, is it possible to have AGI without qualia?
Well, that's a deep question. I think, it gets into the hard problem of consciousness, and I think even from the Deutsch and Popperian sphere, there are conjectures about this, which I lean towards being that, it's a package deal. Creativity, personhood, free will, qualia, consciousness, they're all a package deal. They evolve together, and they can't be separate. So this ties to like animal consciousness and AI consciousness and that sort of thing. I think if an AI is generally creative, and it will be a person in the same way that we are, like universality wise, and that will therefore have generated like subjective qualia. That's my conjecture.
Yeah, mine as well. I don't have super strong feelings on it because I think we just don't know yet. But like the whole concept of just having a problem, the capacity to have a problem, it's in some sense it has this subjective aspect to it. It's the clash of ideas that's going on. The ideas aren't working, but there's certainly feeling associated with that. This sense that you can have a problem. That we prompt the AI, but we ourselves are prompted from within. The prompt is not coming from without. No one's giving us the prompt in general. So yeah.
Because if Wonderism is a philosophy of feeling, as I'm trying to make it, and we don't have a good theory of what feeling is, then that is a definite area for improvement. I don't have the answer for that, unfortunately.
Now, you're writing a book on Wonderism. Can you tell me a little bit about that, or are you able to share anything about that?
Yeah. So I mean, my preferred form is writing, and I was saying like the form is important here. So I'm trying to make a philosophically accurate work. So it's serving the argument for sure, but it's going to have like some artistic flair to it, I think. And I think if I'm successful, then it will make you feel the philosophy as much as you understand it. It's going to be in 7 short books. I'm sort of like marketing, like stylizing the book in the style of like the 18th century. So the cover's going to look, it's a bit of a pastiche, but I think it will work. And the books, so the number 7, there are 7 wonders of the world. There's going to be a chapter on the history of the Enlightenment, comparative philosophy of Romanticism and Enlightenment, as we spoke about. It's going to be called Songs of Lightness and of Love. It's going to have like a lot of allusions to pretty florid things, as well as, and one of the chapters is going to be about I'm developing a wondrous style. It's this idea of both saying the thing and singing the thing, so that you can best display the meaning and the feeling and the wonder to it. Through that, I'm reading a lot of contemporary writers who I respect, like Emerson and Thomas Carlyle and William Hazlitt. It's going to have a chapter on my theory of art and my theory of romance. Yeah, it's quite capacious.
This is a question no author wants, but which the audience will be calling out for, is, do we have any timeline? How long until this gets completed, published?
Yeah, well, I think, seeing conversation, I'm developing a lot. So I still have some thinking to do, but the structure is pretty much set in my head. I know what I'm going to be writing about. And that can obviously change with new updated ideas. But I think I'm a pretty good writer. I think what I write is good, but in another sense, I'm a terrible writer, and like I'm terrible at doing the writing. So no, but end of this year, maybe next year, maybe, who knows?
Cool. And so what else beyond the book is happening with Tom Hyde at the moment before we let you go?
Well, there's an exciting project that I can't say too much. I'm hopefully going to be interviewing a person of note, of interest in the community, doing a somewhat biographical piece, which would be probably the preeminent piece on this person, and it will have lots of novel, interesting, hopefully wonderful anecdotes and theories.
Excellent. That sounds really exciting. That's a nice tease. So Conjecture Institute is helping support Tom with some of his work. And if you'd like to support Tom, you can go to conjectureinstitute.org and scroll down and find a button that says Donate to Tom to help him out. Tom, is there anything else you'd like to leave the audience with today?
No. Well, it's been really nice talking to you. I guess follow me on X at Tom Hyde _ if you're interested in these ideas and want to follow me. I also have a Substack where I occasionally write. Some of these theories that I've spoken about are on there. That's this Tom Hyde Substack. It's called Tom of Letters.
Yes, and if you really need the links for that, they are also available to both Tom's Substack and to his Twitter there on the Conjecture Institute website as well. Thanks so much for joining me today, Tom, and I hope we'll get to talk again soon.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.